It's a special day here in the lodge. We've got some great conversations. So I hope you stick around for the afternoon. Now, this is one of my favorite conversations of the day. We're going to talk about global trade, shipping, and navigating volatility in an era of geopolitical risk. I've got with me today Alex Kulitz. He's co-chair of the Foreign Council on Economic Relations of Germany. And I've got the CEO of Seanergy, Maritime Holdings Corporation. I've got Stamatis to Tsantanis. Gentlemen, let's start talking about first the geopolitical choke points that are now a recurring feature in the global conversation. What specific operational and contractual changes are you looking at or thinking about? And this is probably more applicable to you, in terms of maybe routing, charter party clauses, insurance, hedging, and counterparty limits to treat disruption as a business as usual, and where are you still structurally exposed?
Well, thank you, and great to be here. Mm-hmm. So thanks for this great conversation. I want to say that the amount of uncertainty we have seen the last couple of years, especially the last 12 months, has been pretty much at the highest point that we have seen in this industry for more than 25, 30 years. We have so many things going on around the world. We have geopolitical tensions, we have changes of trade routes, we have shadow fleets, we have all these things happening. So the last 5-6 years we went through a pandemic that kind of disrupted the supply chains significantly. Then we had an invasion. I mean, one country invaded one other, which is a key component of the global logistical chain in coal, oil, natural gas, and all that. And recently we have all this threat and imposition and, postponement of tariffs and everything associated with that. So our lives have become very, very challenging on a daily basis as we try to navigate and provide the transportation service that we need to provide around the world. So it's a very, very challenging operation these days.
And we were talking before we came on about Greece's role in all this. I mean, 22% of the global fleet?
Yes, Greece owns about 22% of the global fleet in respect of cargo transportation capacity. So it's very major, as you can imagine. I mean, Greece and China together, it's almost half of the global fleet. Greece also owns about 80% of the European Union fleet. So, our strategic importance in this geopolitical situation is very, very, it's very, very important.
How is the European Union and Europe looking at all of these issues, and from a global standpoint, and the choke points and all this sort of turmoil? What's the thinking in terms of shipping and moving product to market?
Yes, thanks a lot, and also thanks for this conversation. I think this is really one of the tough topics. To be honest, I think on the European side, sometimes we're just way too naive. So we don't really, we all know about the threats, and all of us, we don't have the answers. And this is kind of what makes us struggle. Like so many times in the European Union, it's also a question of how do the national states prepare. Stamatis already mentioned the pandemic, so we know, we experienced what it means if we have a disruption of the supply chains. This is a disaster, and at the moment, as the world is changing drastically, geoeconomically, and trying to decouple, de-risk, however you want to name it, this gives us this is a big problem, because we know that the German economy at the moment being at its worst since at least 20 years, needing all these raw materials, needing all the productions, and still we don't have any answers on how to tackle all these threats. And as Europe, we don't speak with one single voice when it comes to the issue of confronting all these upcoming challenges. South Chinese Sea. What about if United States and China don't get along with each other? The shadow fleet issues, tariffs, ports being used. I mean, trade is being used as a weapon nowadays, as a political weapon. And that is something we have not found an answer so far. Sometimes it feels like us in Europe, we're the only ones playing by the rules, and the rest of the game already left the table saying, okay, no, we have our own rules now, and Europe is always putting, no, it's not working that way. So we have to find new solutions, and we're struggling in Europe doing this. Sometimes we're just too naive on sitting together and tackling the real issues.
I'm glad you brought up the weaponization of trade. I think that's really key, and I'm glad you did it and I didn't have to. I mean, it feels like to me that Europe and Greece and shipping particularly, you're almost having to choose sides. And talk about that a little bit from your perspective, from both of your perspectives. What does that mean, and what does that look like, and how do you straddle that? How do you stay in the middle, because you're at having to pick sides between China and the United States, and it's got to be such an uncomfortable place to be.
Well, it's as I mentioned before, it's extremely challenging. I mean, especially after Liberation Day for a period of about 5-6 months. We all remember Liberation Day, right? It was extremely difficult because you had to satisfy USTR. So we needed to make sure that all our fleet and our operations satisfied USTR. Then China, in retaliation, imposed some exorbitant, tariffs for port use for calling there if the ships had some sort of an American edge. So in order for us to navigate between the two super mega powers, it was extremely challenging. It was a headache. Thank God that this thing has gotten postponed, but I don't really see how we're going to find a solution in the future. We will definitely need to pick sides in the future, and I don't know if that's going to be happening on an individual basis or on a state basis or on a European Union basis. So this is going to be extremely critical into the future because the fleet is pretty much what it is given, and on that point exactly, China is importing the biggest amounts of raw materials globally. They import almost 2/3 of all the iron ore, bauxite. They produce 56% of the global steel production. So we're very, very much reliant on China producing all these finished products in order to drive infrastructure and everything else all over the world. We cannot really decouple that.
Absolutely. And I think this idea of de-risking, what we call it in Europe, decoupling or however, is probably the worst thing to do. I mean, globalization has its issues. It's not the topic today, but after all, it is it's the reason why prosperity and why we all have this living that we have nowadays. It's one part of it is globalization, and to destroy everything that was made over the years, all these multilateral institutions when it comes to the sea, but let it be the World Trade Organization, let it be World Health Organization, United Nations, you name them, those multilateral rules we gave to the game and we gave each other, they're all at stack at the moment, and that makes it so challenging. Do we have to pick sides? I'm not quite sure, because I see that there is also many minor powers, smaller countries striving to keep up the multilateral order. So I'm kind of interested in what ASEAN, for example, I mean, they are very close to China. They're very dependent on China. On the other hand, they really strive not to be, not to have to pick one side. And also big power, India, for example, or Indonesia. We still see this willingness and the hope that we can stay at the multilateral order rather than having to pick sides and going back into a bloc era where you have two big blocs, two superpowers confronting each other. But this is a challenge where us in Europe, we have to find our role. And unfortunately, everybody's looking at us, but we still haven't got the clue how to do it. And that's...
What do you think that is?
Well, the main reason is, to be very honest...
What does it look like when Europe...
If you look at the European Union, the core of the European, the heart, the power lies within the Council. But the Council, to be very honest, is not a European body. It's a body of all the national prime ministers, national governments sitting together, trying to find a common voice. But they have national interests rather than European interests. So I think the only solution on the long run is either we strengthen the Commission or we strengthen the Parliament. But we need a European institution to take the decisions rather than having the national states taking the decisions within a European community. Otherwise, we won't be able to forward this idea and to have a common voice? I mean, it's absurd, to be honest. Europe has only one foreign interest, and this is trade, more or less. We're not an imperialistic country. We're not a military, superpower. So our main interest is trade, is prosperity for our people. Now, foreign affairs is still a question of national interests in Europe, whereas trade already is a European question. We have a commissioner for trade, but we only have a high representative for foreign affairs. So if Estonia and Latvia and Greece and Germany and Spain, all of us have our own foreign affairs. Some of them are right-wing parties ruled, others left-wing party ruled. It's not going to work out. We've seen that when Estonia at some point said, okay, we're going to recognize Taiwan as an own country, and China said, okay, listen, and we're going to just ignore Estonia. It's not existing anymore. All the other Baltic countries had a huge issue, Latvia especially. How do we deal with the situation? Of course, we go along with Estonia. On the other hand, they just had a big Chinese investment. It's a disaster. So if we don't manage to have a common foreign policy in Europe, we're not going to be able to solve these problems, and nobody's going to wait for us.
If I can expand a little bit on that point, the thing here is that Europe has been squeezed a lot the last few years. They have been squeezed from the West, and we have been squeezed by the East. And that has created a huge problem, for most importantly for the European Union citizens. What we need to realize is that Europe has a tremendous weight right now in respect of transportation, shipping, the GDP by itself, it's pretty much significant on a global perspective. So the more that we apply this weight on a global perspective, instead of being defensive, that's going to play a key role, in my opinion, for the future of Europe.
And that was sort of my next question. With the weaponization of trade, how does Europe avoid not reacting in an aggressive way, but it puts its foot down and says, we're not going to be pushed around, or we're not going to. How do you do? I mean, what does that look like?
Well, I don't know. For a lot simpler things, Europe has not really put its foot down for anything.
Correct.
But
it has to stand its ground in some way.
It has, but up to the absolute necessary. That's the problem. You really need to put a lot of weight into decision making, but the European Union decision making is so fragmented that creates a huge problem. So it's not a decision of 2 or 3 bigger superpowers. It's not a matter of democracy or majority. Everybody needs to agree, and we only have so many member states. It's kind of impossible to agree. That's the problem.
Yeah. I agree. Anything to add?
I agree. No, I mean that's. I understand why we are in this issue, because this idea of the supranational European Union. We got stuck on the way. I mean, the idea of having a federal union. Somehow we got stuck on the way, and we stopped at a supranational organization, which is not. Well, in Germany we say it's not fire, it's not ice, it's nothing really, right. And this is something we have to overcome, and it's very difficult with all these national interests and all these also neo-populistic parties arising, neo-nationalistic ideas coming up in the member states. Yeah. So it's going to be very tough for the European Union itself to reinvent itself. The good thing is there's so much pressure from the outside nowadays that we barely have another option. So we do have to do something. We need some desperate reforms. Otherwise, we will get grinded by these uprising new challenges globally. And for the European Union, trade is open and free markets. I'm German, so Germany is dependent on open and free markets. Our market is way too small to serve, but we've been exporting. We've been the world champion for exports for many, many years. Of course, China and also the United States overtook us in some parts because we're a small country with 80 million. But without open and free markets, Germany is. Well, we have a huge issue. We already have a huge issue nowadays, and we are still the engine of the European economy. So let's be very honest. If we don't solve this problem very quickly, many people are looking onto the new German government on that, but we're not looking onto the European Commission to solve the problem. We're looking on Chancellor Merz. That's not going to work. So at what point do we get together? And this is something I want to be optimistic, but unfortunately I'm not too optimistic because the pressure is probably not too high yet.
Well, we're not going to be dystopian today. Let's talk about regulation. Have things like the ESG priorities, are they getting in the way of growth and change and being able to I mean, is regulation in Europe getting in the way of progress?
Well, it was up to a point. I mean, for a good reason. Even though the shipping contribution to the global CO2 emissions is pretty minimal, it's only like 2.8% global CO2 emissions, and that for almost 90% of everything transported globally, it's pretty much minimal. There was a drive to try to reduce that even further. However, it came to a point where most of these proposed solutions were either unrealistic or extremely expensive for anything of that to be applied. So there came the net zero effort back in October, November, where the US really put its foot down and said, this is not going to happen. You have to postpone that. I don't see that as a bad thing necessarily, because it's going to allow more time for the shipping world to adapt into practical solutions. Right now, there's no practical solution outside of, I don't know, green hydrogen and ammonia and all that, where you actually need more energy to produce the green fuels. So that doesn't make any sense. I mean, how are you going to use more energy to produce something which is supposed to be friendly for the environment and costs a lot of money? Who's going to pay for that? So that is going to give us a bit of a leeway in order for the industry to adapt further. I'm not against the net zero. It's just that maybe we're pushing for too much change in too little time, and we were not ready for that. And then you have this new administration in the US that suddenly says that coal is great, oil is great. So you have the reemergence of CO2 and carbon fuels into the equation. I'm not going to argue here it's good or bad or what have you, but it's like swimming against the tide right now. So that by itself for Europe is very important, because there's a massive investment in green fuels and massive investment in alternative energy solutions. But I'm not sure that fits in a world where you have massive increase in energy needs driven mostly by AI. So you either exclude yourself from progress, which is AI, and you become like, again, a defensive place where the United States and China will have surpassed everybody because of their vast energy provisions. Or you say that we need to upgrade our grid, invest more in things that will produce cheaper energy for our citizens, and they will be able to use AI and all this new technological evolution in a more cost-efficient way. Otherwise, it's going to be crazy expensive.
Yeah.
And definitely regulation is a big challenge, because it makes us incompatible to others. And AI is a wonderful example. We're not on the forefront of AI. China and America is, but we're the only ones regulating it already. So instead of, we're making really hard the life for ourselves. It's not only ESG. Okay, I do understand the reasons, but ESG certainly is something we take very serious, especially in Germany. It's a political interest, but it's also Supply Chain Act and etc. You can name them. There's so many regulation that especially the small and medium-sized companies really, and I often hear from politicians, yeah, but they don't have to comply. Yes, they do, because the Supply Chain Act actually says the big companies are supposed to put it onto the smaller ones, onto their suppliers. So yes, we do. And this is a lot of, this makes us, we make ourselves less competitive than we actually should be. We have the technology, we have the brains, we have the talents, we have everything we need, but we regulate ourselves into a niche where suddenly the other countries, especially the superpowers, are overtaking us, even though we have the opportunities. And that's very unfortunate, and we definitely have to stop this. And if it comes to ESG, yes, I do understand the reasons, but I think we also have to be very aware of what is happening right now. Democracies also live on the idea that the sovereign elects for certain people to lead them, for their governments. Now, if we re-educate our people, our sovereign people, all the time, so we've been preaching them ESG now for I don't know how many years, suddenly we have a new situation. It's all about defense. It's all about the question. We have a war going on in Ukraine and Russia. We have two superpowers getting more and more aggressive and confronting each other. And suddenly ESG, yeah, it's still an issue, but it's not so important anymore. And now we have to tell everybody, we have to raise our budgets, we have to raise our military, we have to raise our... let's be very honest. I don't know how much carbon is emitted by the war in Ukraine and Russia, but I believe we could drive many, many German diesel cars for many years just to. And so we're changing the narrative all the time. The government is changing the narrative for the sovereign. At some point, we will divide the society. There's people, for them, ESG is the most important topic to tackle today, and we have to save the climate, we have to save the earth. For the next one, it's a security threat. And at some point, people are not aligning with an idea, and we are dividing our societies. That's very dangerous for our democracy in total.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, let's say the example of China. Right now, China says that we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050. And I've been to China, and I'm going to China very often throughout the year, and I see that they actually invest a lot in renewables and all these alternative fuels and all that. But at the same time, are they reducing their steel production capacity? No, they're not. Are they reducing their shipbuilding? On the contrary, they've been expanding their shipbuilding almost 4 or 5% on an annual basis. The exports of steel out of China is almost 4% a year. So that gives you an example that a country can still, be environmentally friendly and at the same time have very significant, very, very significant industrial production, which is super necessary in our world this year. So, what we've done in Europe is that we have managed to send away all the industrial production. There's no industry. It's kind of dying and decreasing every year because things are getting more and more expensive. You have the carbon tax, you have the EU ETS, you have this fuel EU, you have all these things that actually make it impossible for any industrial production to happen in Europe. For the sake of what? For buying things more expensively from longer distances, and actually, the net zero is turning to our detriment.
Yeah, great points, guys. I think that's right. I wanted to get the audience involved. I think we have time for one or two questions from the audience. Does anybody have one? No. Come on now, speak up. Please.
My name is Victoria Kerna, and I am of WRE Energy, and this is renewables mainly, and we are involved in hydrogen. We are a German investment in Greece since 30 years, and I would like to ask Mr. Stamatis, what do you think about hydrogen or ammonia in the shipping industry?
Well, thanks for the question. We're very much in favor as green ammonia and green hydrogen to become, at a certain point, useful in shipping. There are two big difficulties here. Number one is the cost. As I mentioned before, you need more power to produce green ammonia than you actually are saving. So that's a bit of an issue. Why are we doing all that? So while I'm super in favor of both green ammonia and green hydrogen, we need to find a practical way of producing it in an environmentally friendly way. So that's number one. Number two is the risk, especially for ammonia. As you know, it's highly toxic. So operating ammonia on board ships, you need special training on the crews, and that does not take away the risk element of a certain pollution, which is going to have way more detrimental results than the benefits of reducing the CO2. So we're not there yet. We need a few more years for the engines and the people to adapt. We're going to get there, but not for the next 3 to 5 years. I don't see that being applied on a wide-scale basis.
Hi, I'm Nancy Basales from 4Air. So we've been working in sustainability and aviation I've been doing it for 20 years, but for about 5 years, really seriously around things like new fuels and new ways to, I think they're under the same exact pressures as marine is. I think you're a couple of years behind us, but watching all the taxes, the policies, the social pressures, I said it's coming down from every avenue. So when you're talking about renewable fuels, we understand the issues with things like ammonia and marine fuels, definitely different. And that's why we invest in companies that are producing these fuels that actually are drop-in fuels for marine, for aviation, for gasoline, across the board, because I think price parity is probably you're all in business. You're all in business, right? And we're trying to continue with successful business. And it's how do you make these fuels in a way that it's not putting people out of business between the taxes, the policies, and the tariffs. Yes, I'm American, but I understand. It's looking for these alternatives, and we're seeing more and more need in marine as well. So we're starting to gear over that the fuels that we're invested in actually are creating both marine fuels and aviation fuels, because I think there's so many similarities. Bringing also those two industries, bringing Europe together to help is one thing, but also bringing together those two industries because they're both at about 2% of total emissions, right?
Yeah.
But have more optics and pressure on us, I think, than any other industry.
That's the thing. I mean, it's the optics. And, we've been using biofuels. We were actually the first company to use biofuels back in 2020 on one of our ships. But we compete for biofuels between us and the airline industry. So there's only a limited amount of biofuels we can source. So we do that. It's like little patches here and there. It's not going to solve the problem permanently, but that's pretty much how it is.
Yeah.
But this is probably also one of, I can only take the German example. When it comes to biofuels, of course we have the technology, it exists, but we don't have enough biofuels. Why? Because politically we prevent also this technology to really succeed. One example is, I just came from Brazil some time ago, and every petrol station, all the cars more or less run on ethanol. Yeah. I ask myself, why is this not working in Germany? Because we always claim that the others are so bad. No, it's actually, we have e-fuel, and we have the diesel and the fuel, it's E7 or E10, so we put in a little ethanol, 7%, 10%. But we would be capable of doing it 80%, 90%. We are not doing it, and that's a political reason. The idea was, if we want to have an electric infrastructure, then you need somebody to invest into this infrastructure. Now, if we take out the biofuels of the if they are not used for cars, because there is no incentive for cars to use them, then of course we have more incentive to invest in this new infrastructure. The minute I would allow biofuels or even synthetic fuels or others, I could use the existing infrastructure, because every petrol station in the country can easily just change its liquid, rather than putting up all these new electric infrastructure. That was the main reason why we decided, I think it was in 2013, not to subsidize in any way biofuels or synthetic fuels, and to stick with the idea to electrify everything. Simple as that. If we would have changed it, then of course the big car manufacturers and all the others would have a huge interest in speeding up the production of biofuels, synthetic fuels, having R&D on these topics, etc. It's a political decision why we never went that way.
But it would have been a cheaper one. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We could have covered a lot more today. I appreciate your frank answers and your honesty here. Stick with us. We're going to be back at 1 o'clock. We've got another great conversation, and we're going to be talking about at 1 o'clock. We're going to talk about the next decade of investment in infrastructure, energy, and the future of private equity. But Alex, Stamatis, thank you.
Thanks.
Yep.